I have just finished The Way of Kings for the second time, and before we talk about the book itself and what I thought about it, we need to talk about the context with which I'm going into this book because, every reread is different. Every time you approach a book, the context of the way you are approaching it, your preconceptions, and the knowledge you already have is important. So, from the top, because it's been a while, I've mostly been doing comic reviews on this channel for a little while because The Way of Kings is a long book. I have been reading through the Cosmere in kind of my own reading order. Starting last year, I read through Elantris, I read through Mistborn Era 1 and 2, Secret History included, don't you worry. I've also been reading various standalones, novellas, and short stories, such as Warbreaker and The Emperor's Soul and Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell. And ahead of me lies the Stormlight Archive, the kind of novellas in between them, and the secret projects. That's kind of a broad overview of where I'm at in terms of Cosmere reading order. As for this being a reread, I first read The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance back in, let me check, 2017. And I remember hardly anything from that read through. Much like my reread of Mistborn Era 1, I found myself enjoying the fact that I had forgotten so much about it because it lent to a very unique experience of kind of being like, wait, what was the deal with this again? And then remembering it as it happens and going, oh shit, and having my own kind of revelation in some parts of the book. It's not even meant to be that much of a revelatory experience, but because of the way my memory has failed me over the years, it kind of becomes that. All I could really remember about this book was that there was a character called Kaladin who spent a lot of time being a slave and being very unhappy, and that there was a character called Shallan, and there was some freaky shit about her drawings, specifically the symbol-headed creatures. Oh, and I remember Dalinar as a character, but honestly, I don't think I even remembered him having visions. Like, that's the level of how much I had forgotten. And in terms of Words of Radiance coming up here, literally all I remember about that book is one scene from the very end, which I'm sure people know what I'm talking about just by me saying that, but it's when one character commits a surprising and shocking act. So yeah, this was like 90% a new experience for me, even though technically it wasn't. But the final thing I want to mention about this particular reading of The Way of Kings is just reiterating that context of I've been reading through the Cosmere as a whole, which means I'm making connections that I never made during my original read-through. I might not remember it, but I remember that I didn't point at certain names and references and gasp. That happened a few times in this book, which was very fun. But also just, I've been reading the Cosmere for a year, and I'm starting to wonder if I should have started the Stormlight Archive now, or if I should have taken a break. I'm constantly grappling between I want to keep everything fresh in my mind so that I can point and gasp at references and enjoy that, or take a break so that I don't burn out on Brandon Sanderson's particular approach to writing, because he's fantastic, and I want to mention I had a great time with this book. I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I enjoyed it as much as my first time reading through it because of this. As I'm reading The Way of Kings, a part of my reading experience is just recognizing the building blocks of the way Sanderson writes and just going, oh, Kaladin is very much the Rayadin, is very much the Kelsier of this story. They share a lot of traits. They're different characters for sure, but especially Rayadin, in my opinion, they share a lot of traits. And also, I follow Brandon Sanderson's YouTube channel. I listen to his podcast. I like the guy. I know him quite well from an outside perspective, and therefore I'm also kind of reading it and going, oh, I can see how this adheres to his beliefs and things that he's said before, and oh, I can see why he wrote this way because I've also listened to his writing lectures and he talks about his philosophy on writing and this adheres to that. It's not enough to fully distract me, and indeed it does lend its own kind of enjoyment to the reading experience, but at the same time, I don't think I got as lost in this world as I did in my first read-through. And we'll get to talking about the story itself soon, I promise, but I just want to mention, because I said I'm not sure I enjoyed it as much as my original read-through, I've also read more epic fantasy between then and now, and as I finished A Way of Kings, I can't help but feel that the Stormlight Archive and Roshar is missing something that I look for in epic fantasy nowadays. And honestly, that might just come from the fact that it steers so far away from tradition, which is a good thing. It needs to be its own thing. But it's just, I think, how do I put this into words? I feel like we focus on quite a small part of Roshar. I don't get the sense of this giant world with this grand, interesting history. I mean, I do, because we get Dalinar's visions and we get to learn about the Radiants and Voidbringers, and there's lore, and I like the lore, so that's not quite what I'm trying to say. But, because we spend most of the book on the Shattered Plains from two perspectives, and in Caer Brumf from another, and we don't really move from those places, you don't get the sense of grand adventure, which I think I enjoy. And maybe not every epic fantasy has to be a grand adventure, but I do enjoy a grand adventure in my epic fantasy, and I think that is what is missing from the Way of Kings. It eschews the traditional structure of epic fantasy so much that it kind of ends up losing part of what I love about the genre. I think that's how I'm going to say that. I think that's fair. It's very much a subjective taste thing and not a criticism of the writing. Actually, sorry, one more thing that's just occurred to me. Villains. It doesn't really have a good either personable arch villain or villainous kind of overarching looming threat. I mean, we have Sadeas and we have the Everstorm, so don't get me wrong, technically they are there, but in terms of the Dark One or Winter coming with the Army of the Dead and all of that stuff, maybe this becomes more apparent in later books, but as of The Way of Kings, it all feels so far off, and we spend so much more time on smaller conflicts, like the Parshendi and stuff. I do not believe that they're going to be the big final villain, despite the revelation in this book about what they are. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I wanted something more imposing as a villain or a threat. But to get into the actual story, so yeah, Kaladin. I always kind of think of Kaladin as the main character, even though he's not really. There's multiple perspectives which each share. Well, I suppose he is in every part, isn't it? That is a part of the structure of this book that I did not like. We went long periods of time without checking in with certain characters. And I'll get to my favourite perspective in a little bit. But Kaladin. Kaladin's story is interesting and really good. He feels like a really cohesive, believable character. We get such a thorough look at who he is, how he got into this situation and his past and the things that make him tick, and the things my favorite part about his character honestly was him believing that he was cursed and still kind of trying to talk him out of that, and him finally coming to realize that to just call what is happening to him a curse is to absolve himself or to avoid taking responsibility for his own actions. And even though he's been dealt a pretty bad deck of cards in the game of life, I suppose, he can still have agency in how he approaches his difficult life. And I really do love that about Kaladin's story. And honestly, this is the kind of thing you want from epic fantasy, right? You spend so long with a character examining them that you can kind of start to understand them and then cross compare what they're going through with what you're going through in your own life, and hearing the whole it's not a curse thing, you have agency in your own life and how you choose to approach things. I kind of needed to hear that recently, so yeah, that is a gold star for this book. Slap it on the front. Oh, I did forget to mention I'm listening to the audiobook version narrated by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. That is how I experienced all of The Wheel of Time. It is how I experienced this book originally as well, and I would highly recommend it. So I guess slap that gold star on the audiobook cover instead. Next up we've got Dalinar, and I love Dalinar as a character. I'm realizing as I'm reading this book that I've got a soft spot for the general with the strict moral code kind of a character. The older man with a lot of battle experience who doesn't have time for politics and shit. I love Dalinar. I love Ned Stark. I love oh god, what was the Wheel of Time one? Oh, my brain is in a different fantasy universe, I can't think. Gareth Bryn, although maybe he doesn't fit that archetype quite as strictly with the moral code stuff, but still, I do just like that archetype of character a lot, and I think Dalinar is we get to spend so much time with him. It's kind of the first time that we've really had one of those characters characters as part of like the main cast of characters instead of like the supporting cast, if you know what I mean. That's comparing him to Gareth Bryn, not Ned Stark, you know what I mean. But just trying to do the right thing while the rest of the world arrays itself against you for trying to do the right thing. Although Dalinar trying to do the right thing is mostly based on him trying to follow a code of ethics written out as almost like a religion, which, I mean, if it helps him change the track of his life and get onto doing the right moral thing, then sure, but, you know, not the way I would have gone with that. But it is a major theme in Brandon Sanderson's works, and he doesn't shy away from what it is and how other people are going to react to it and the flaws of it, so I'm cool with it. I mentioned I had a favourite viewpoint in this book, and that was Shallan. I don't know if this was the case for my original read-through, but Shallan was easily my favourite point of view in this book. There's just so much fascinating stuff happening around her. You've got the mystery about just what happened in her past. Like, it's pretty obvious that she killed her dad, but like the fact that she avoids thinking about it leads to some fun character traits about repression, and just the fact that every time as you're following her as a reader, you're like, she has a shard blade, doesn't she? But then also I really enjoyed every interaction she had with I was going to say Nynaeve. Sorry, Wheel of Time brained. I am also reading through the world of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time right now, so that does not help. Yasna! Fucking hell, I had to look that up. Too many nouns. Yeah, every conversation between Shallan and Yasna was just so good. I love Yasna Khalin as like the only heretic, it feels like, in the entirety of the world who's actually willing to say like, are you sure about this whole religion thing? Brandon Sanderson writes an atheist so well without approaching it as like the wrong mindset to have, and I really appreciate that. That shows such a high level of intelligence from a person and just reinforces my belief that even though I'm an atheist, following a faith does not say anything about your level of intelligence or your ability to consider other points of view that I think a lot of atheists feel about people of faith. But anyway, that's a whole different discussion. Honestly, my standout, despite all the like really cool lore stuff and mysteries and stuff surrounding Shallan, which is mostly what I appreciate her POV for, my favorite standout chapter was probably Philosophy in Action. No, it's called The Lesson, but there's a whole thing about philosophy in action, and it's when Yasna takes Shallan out and soul casts some evil men, and is like, now was that a bad thing that I did because I went looking for them? And Shallan's just traumatized. So good. But also everything going on with Shallan about how she's got like this weird photographic memory and can kind of sketch photographs perfectly, and she ends up, you know, it's kind of like the whole you take a picture of something and there's a spooky ghost in the background trope, except it's fantasy style with Shallan's photographic memory scribblings. And the chase scene where she's like frantically drawing what's behind her so that she can see the symbol-headed creatures following her, and that escalation is so good. And honestly, this is one of the points that I vaguely remembered from the book, was the whole, there is a scene where one of the symbol-headed creatures, I assume, whispers in her ear, "What are you?" And literally every hair on my freaking piece of my body stood up. I remember I was walking to work. I still work there, but it was like one of my first days on the job. I was walking to work and I was listening to that section, and I just stopped. And I was like, I knew to expect it this time, so it didn't have quite the same effect, but chills. I also have a theory. Okay, theory time. You ready for me to be tremendously wrong about something? And I should warn you, this is probably going to be something that incorporates... It's not like overt spoilers, but it does incorporate knowledge from how I understand the Cosmere works from other books. So maybe skip ahead a few minutes if you haven't read the other books. But I know that magic in the Cosmere comes in the form of something called investiture, and I think that Roshar's investiture takes the form of stormlight. Stormlight is kept and drawn from spheres, which have become the currency of Roshar. There is a chapter called Shadesmar in which Shallan finds herself in, presumably, Shadesmar, and she is kind of like carried away on currents of spheres. I know from other Cosmere readings that investiture is also closely linked to the soul. Shallan thinks that the being she speaks to in Shadesmar is the soul of the goblet that she soulcast. Perhaps that is why there were spheres. I think the spheres of Roshar might be the physical manifestation of souls from Shadesmar, and that's why they can hold Stormlight. That is my current cook. I could be wrong, but that is my current assumption going forwards. If that is confirmed in Words of Radiance, remember that I do not remember probably 99% of that book, and maybe it's just implanted somewhere in my subconscious, but I don't think so. Anyway, another really fun part of this book was wit. Now, speaking of things I ended up remembering as I was reading through it, I was like, I'm pretty sure Wit is Hoyd, and it does turn out that Wit is indeed Hoyd. Now, Hoyd has different personalities, it feels like, in every Cosmere book that we see him in, but I get the feeling that in this book, Hoyd's more himself than anywhere else, because you see Wit leave the king's service, but he's still basically Wit as he's going around the world and talking to people, and there is that wonderful scene he has with Kaladin shortly after Kaladin learns that he can infuse Stormlight. In fact, you know what? We're going to dedicate the kind of end portion of this video to full Cosmere spoilers, I think. So if you've been hanging around till now, just know that I really enjoyed this book. I'd probably give it like a 4 out of 5. I think maybe my original reading was more of a 5 out of 5 though. But yeah, I'm excited to continue the Stormlight Archive, especially now that the first arc is fully complete, whereas back when I first started this, it was not. But yeah, to get back to Hoyd, full spoilers now, full Cosmere spoilers. Unfortunately, when looking something up, I did stumble across a bit of lore that told me that Hoyd is one of the shards. I do know that in a time when I probably shouldn't, but also I kind of puzzled that out myself, so it's not really a massive spoiler. He's like this world hopper. I think he's trying to see what happens if you can like have every kind of investiture at once, because we saw him in the Elantris prologue trying to become an Elantrian basically, and one of the spheres, or whatever they're called, god, it's been a minute, it's been a year, was like, that's not how that works, dude. We see him in Mistborn, posing as a beggar. He has a very weird presence in Mistborn Era 1, because it doesn't really feel like he does much, but we also see him arrive in Mistborn Secret History, and he kind of treats Kelsier like shit, which was weird. That kind of felt out of character for what I know about Hoyd so far, but I guess I don't really know much about Hoyd, so I don't know. Then again, from what I've read of Mistborn Era 2, Kelsier could be kind of becoming an antagonistic force, I don't know. He's definitely morally grey. The trajectory of Kelsier's character feels like it's going downwards, which is really fun. But anyway, we also see him in Mistborn Era 2 basically being Wax's coach driver, and again, he doesn't really seem to do much there either, although he does at one point, does he fish Wax out of a river or something? I think I mentioned what he did in the book review, but again, I've read another book since then, so we've already lost parts of my memories about what happens. But in Mistborn Era 2, it felt like Hoyd was there to help. And then in Warbreaker, Hoyd was like this storyteller, and he told our protagonist... got too many nouns, okay? Too many nouns. He told our protagonist about the history of the world, which actually ended up being pretty important, but he did it in such like a unique way, and we kind of saw that again with how he talked to Kaladin in The Way of Kings, and I feel like that is part of the truth of Hoyd, is that he is a storyteller, and that he tells the story in kind of like this full immersive 4D IMAX experience kind of a way. I also happen to know that Tress of the Emerald Sea is basically a story of the Cosmere told to us by Hoyd or something, so yeah, I think that's like his true nature, or part of his true nature. But yeah, it's really fun to see Hoyd. I didn't really talk about Dalinar's visions too much. It was really fun to see kind of like the lore of the history of the world, and one of the shards is basically the god, right? The Almighty, that is talking to him at the end. I don't know if I'm going crazy. He was said to have dark skin and bright white hair. That kind of sounds like an Elantrian to me, although the Elantrians have more of a chrome skin, right? So I don't know. If he comes from Cell, I will not be surprised. But also, he's a shard, and probably one of the original shards who like blew up Adolnasium or whatever, and took his power. So maybe the aspects of him that look like an Elantrian just also happen to be what make up Elantris. I don't know. There's still lots to learn, and it's difficult to do so when the series is this huge and this long, and I'm already forgetting parts from what I've read over the last year, so maybe I am justified in taking a break at some point through this. But I know Words of Radiance is like this very well regarded entry in the series. Worryingly, people seem to think it kind of peaks there. Like, Brandon Sanderson himself has admitted that it's the most well received part of the Stormlight archive, and I know that Wind and Truth was divisive for some reason, which is also a little bit concerning. But also, I've just watched a booktuber read through all of A Song of Ice and Fire, and her favourite was A Feast for Crows. So that just helps me remember that this is my own experience, and maybe I will find a book I like even more than Words of Radiance further down the line, eschewing popular opinion. Well, that's going to do it from me. I know I haven't talked about every single tiny facet. Oh, we didn't talk about Zeph Sonson Volano, Truthless of Shinovar. He's very cool. I'm excited to continue to watch his trajectory as a character, and also like people dying, kind of saying things like important, probably things as they die. What's that about? Don't remember if that's answered in Words of Radiance, but yes, very excited to get to Words of Radiance, mostly just because I don't remember any of it. I'm like, I have no idea what happens in that book, although I'm sure I will start to remember as I read through it, like I did with The Way of Kings. Beyond that, I'm continuing to do my Bat catalogue. I'm also still finishing Far Sector, which is a Green Lantern graphic novel, which I will probably review on the channel before I get to Batman Prey, but then we will focus on Batman for a while, and also in terms of other books I'm reading. I don't know if I'm going to finish The World of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time. I'm really, really enjoying it. I'm loving it, especially like the history parts, but much like the World of Ice and Fire book, the second half of the book is more geographical, and I don't know how well that's going to hold my attention, so I might just give myself leave to abandon that book if I start getting bored reading about, like, oh, the history of Kyrian and politics or something. I mean, that doesn't sound too boring, but you know what I mean. It's not as gripping as The Breaking of the World, right? I'm also... I know. I'm also still reading through... The Devils. There we go, too many nouns, sorry. I'm having a good time with it. I just need to remember to keep reading it. I definitely shouldn't have started The World of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, because that takes up the physical book slot in terms of like how many books I'm juggling and reading at once. But I watched Daniel Green's video about The Wheel of Time, books 1 to 11, a summary of it, and I just needed to. I was looking at the book and I was like, it also happened to be like the 1-year anniversary of me finishing A Memory of Light. That's right. I know the date. It's because of spreadsheets, but I know the date in which I finished that book. And I was like, that's how informative that was for me. I was like, oh yeah, sure, we'll do this real quick. We'll have a quick aside. But I really, really want to start on The Faithful and the Forgotten. The Faithful and the Fallen? What's it called? Malice by John Gwynne. That book's been staring at me since my birthday like 3 months ago, and I really want to read that book so bad. So I hope you're enjoying this epilogue to this video. It's just my ADHD in action. And finally, on Kindle, I'm still reading the Sunita novella, which should not be taking me this long to get through, but I'm kind of stretching it out anyway because of all the other things I'm reading, and because I want to read the last 2 Sunita books back to back, and that's coming out in November, I think. So there you go, there's kind of a general channel update stuck on the end of this. I should probably put chapter markers in the video so people know to jump to and what to avoid. Anyway, thanks so much for stopping by, hearing what I have to say about The Way of Kings. I hope I gave you a good impression of the fact that, yes, I surprisingly have some issues with it, which I don't remember having before, but I did still love it, and I will now be moving on to Words of Radiance, so I will meet you back here for that probably in like 2 months or so.